after Judge Carlos Samour ordered the early release from a Cuban immigrant's 98-year sentence. Rene Lima-Marin was let go but later detained by Immigration and Custom Enforcement agents. In 2000, Marin was convicted of kidnapping, burglary, and robbery, sentenced, but was erroneously released on parole in 2008. Once authorities caught wind of the mistake, he was returned to prison in 2014, which was most recently addressed by Judge Samour. Ed, there are a whole lot of details here, some honest-to-goodness drama and different policy things here. Help us unpack it. What do we need to know?
What we need to know is this is a case that shows the law, as much as it is about absolutes, cannot be run in terms of absolutes. This is a person, Jose Lima-Marin, who should have still been in jail, who was let out erroneously, and who proved in being let out erroneously that there are some people that can be rehabilitated. What Samour took into his account was not saying, hey, guess what, you should still be in jail under the law. What he said was, you have paid back your debt to society, you've lived as an honorable citizen, and we're going to let you out. Okay, so there's the first thing we know, is that's not an absolute. The second absolute, though, is still yet to be known. He's picked up by ICE. He came to this country as a one-year-old from Cuba. Regardless of where you stand on the immigration issue, this has a couple of interesting factors in it. One, he didn't jump the border on his own will. He came over with his parents. Secondly, he didn't come from Mexico or another Latin American country where people are concerned about border jumpers. He came from Cuba, escaping a repressive, brutal dictatorship of the insane Fidel Castro. I mean, these are people that the country essentially has welcomed in. If you're a baseball player, you certainly can stay in this country if you came here on a boat from Cuba, and it should be considered in his case as well. That's not an absolute. That is a complete looking at his circumstances rather than the letter of the law. And it will be very curious now to see if this federal government, which in some ways has tried to look at absolutes in the law, is willing to budge on this, as frankly they probably should be.
I guess it's too bad he spent all that time paying his debt to society and not working on a fastball, so that makes sense. Mike, is this an issue where you think you're going to see some politicians wanting to get into the fray because it's making headlines, it's important, it's community drama, there's a lot of stuff here, or is it somewhat of a third rail that politicians don't get anywhere near because it becomes such a quagmire?
Yeah, I think you're going to see politicians trying to dip their toe into immigration policy, ways to push back on Trump and the pretty hard line they've taken on illegal immigrants, regardless of whether they are gang members or bringing drugs to this country, or whether they are people that were just swept up, brought here by their parents, etc. What's most interesting about this case to me now is state lawmakers are pushing Governor Hickenlooper to pardon him and to basically remove the reason that he would be deported. Now, this will be fascinating. You saw what President Obama did in the last 2 years of his administration, commuting sentences of low-level drug offenders. It'll be interesting to see if Democratic governors, or all governors, start using pardons as a way to confront the Trump administration over deportations.
Pat, it's a great point. That's some of the breaking news from here on Friday, that Governor Hickenlooper is considering this pardon. Do you think he should, and do you think he will?
Well, they'd been asking him to pardon him before this whole ICE issue really came up. And as we've seen from Washington, D.C. right now, the fact that you might be pardoned for the crime is not necessarily going to keep you safe if you did not come to this country legally. I mean, we still have that issue. We're seeing the threats across the country. So he is a new lawyer, right? When we're taping this, Hans Meyer is taking over his case, and he's had a lot of success fighting ICE, so we'll see where this goes. But it's an amazing catch-22 that no one saw coming. You know, yesterday everyone was still celebrating the judge's decision when all of a sudden ICE shows up.
Michael, I could see a lot of details in the story that on really both sides of the coin. Folks are thinking, hey, folks who commit crimes that are here illegally really shouldn't be in the country. But I get the point that he's from Cuba. That's a whole different story. That he came as a one-year-old. So he didn't, like as Ed said, didn't jump the border. When it shakes out, where do you think some folks are going to come down to, and folks being elected officials, as they look at this particular issue?
Yeah, I think they're going to come down on both sides of it, and it is a fascinating case. It's like a movie almost between Cuba and everything else that's going on, and ICE picking them up afterwards. But I think one thing is the initial sentence of 98 years was excessive, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. Second, I feel really bad for his family, the ups and downs that his family has to go through, his kids, his wife. But I do do think that there needs to be a pushback on this narrative of the fact that he is a victim. He had actually 3 armed robberies. You have violent crimes where there are real victims in that case. And so I don't think that the governor should be using a pardon to get around immigration law. I think that's an issue that needs to be discussed on the federal level. Why is ICE, involved in some cases and not in others? You hear a lot of law enforcement agencies who are saying, look, we called ICE and they didn't show up, but they show up in this case. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think that's a broader issue, federal issue that should be dealt with, not on a state level.